Welcome to the channel, where every story is a real slice of LGBT love. Today we begin a healing journey, where two grown men find each other in the rain, the fire, and the unspoken fears. If you have ever loved, been silent, chosen to return to yourself, then this story is for you. Let's listen and feel. First look in the rain. Sometimes, it takes a storm to meet the person who makes you feel like home. Mason Taylor never thought a gray, rainy afternoon could make his heart skip a beat. But it did, right in the middle of a deserted street near Fire Station 7 in Edgeport, Oregon. Mason's old Jeep, which he kept as a memento from his late father, died suddenly as it began to rain. Not a nice spring shower. This was a cold Oregon rain, steep, gray, and unforeseen. Mason got out of the car, holding his hand up to block the water, cursing himself for not getting his car fixed sooner. He was the type of guy who lived alone, worked for himself, and sometimes forgot about the world around him, especially things like remembering to fill up the gas tank, change the battery, check the spark plugs. He looked around in confusion. His phone was running low on battery and his hoodie was no match for the cold that was creeping into his fingertips. That was when he saw a tall figure emerge from the nearby fire station. Broad-shouldered, his hair wet from the rain, his dark black uniform soaked with water but not hiding the strength that radiated from his body. "Need a hand?" The deep voice rang out through the rain like a romantic movie soundtrack. Mason looked up, and for the first time their eyes met. Aiden Scott, 32, firefighter. And the man who made Mason see for the first time in years. Why this moment matters. For many in the LGBT community, first sight is more than just a romantic affair. It's a moment of both excitement and fear. Is the other person like me? Can I feel safe enough to express my feelings? Was the look intentional or unintentional? For Mason, who was used to hiding his heart behind nature photos and anonymous posts, Aiden's gaze was unfamiliar. Warm. Certain. Unabashed. Aiden moved closer, opening the hood as if he had done this 100 times that day. Mason stood beside him, his hands tightening on the straps of his backpack to keep from shivering from the cold, and from a strange feeling he couldn't quite name. "The battery looks dead. I could jump-start it if you don't mind." The big man called him he, in a surprisingly gentle voice. Not like the usual alpha guy in movies. There was something about Aiden that was both steady and comforting. Like a warm fire on a winter night, not burning, just enough to make others want to come closer. Mason smiled slightly, his first smile of the day. "I don't mind. Actually, I'm a little desperate." Aiden laughed. It was still raining, but the laugh sounded like sunshine in Mason's chest. They made small talk as they sparred. About cars, the weather, and the camera hanging from Mason's neck. "Are you a photographer? A cloud chaser more like?" "I shoot nature, mountains, forests, rain, that sort of thing." Aiden nodded. "I like climbing too. Got lost in Black Hollow once and had to call for help. I was so embarrassed because I'm a firefighter." They both laughed. Mason realized then that he was standing very close to Aiden. Close enough to hear his soft breathing under his damp shirt. Close enough that the cold didn't matter. The car started again. Aiden closed the hood, took a step back and smiled. "Next time your car breaks down, I hope you still park near my stop." Mason smiled, his heart beating faster than usual. "I'll remember that." They didn't exchange phone numbers. They didn't rush to ask names. But that look, a look that lasted for a few seconds in the rain as they both stood in silence, said more than any words. Mason drove away, his heart still pounding at the stranger's laughter. He didn't know Aiden's name. But he knew one thing, that look wasn't accidental. Same-sex love sometimes does not begin with a confession or a fateful collision. It is just a look between two men, one fixing a car, the other shivering from the cold, and both silently feel, "Here I am safe. Here I am seen." Strangers in old photos. Sometimes we photograph strangers, only to realize later they were meant to be part of the story. A week had passed since the rain, and that look had not left Mason's mind. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was just a normal moment between two strangers. But every time it rained or when he passed the fire station near his house, his heart would flutter. Mason is an intuitive person. He perceives the world through images, through light, through the silences that others miss. Instead of keeping a diary, he captures his emotions in photographs. And that afternoon, his heart was not ready, so he did not dare raise his camera to take a picture of Aiden. He was afraid of capturing something too real. An accidental discovery. That weekend, Mason was cleaning out his old hard drive, sorting through thousands of photos he'd taken for a local charity 8 months earlier. They'd held a big community event, A bake sale, a firefighting simulation, kids' games. He'd been hired to shoot the entire event, but because of the tight schedule, Mason had never looked at them in detail. He pulled up the first photo, a wide-angle shot of a crowd gathered around a replica fire truck. And then, his eyes fell on a small corner, where a man was bent over a water pipe. Tall, broad shoulders, closely cropped hair. Side profile, a hint of a smile, as warm as that day. Mason zoomed in. His heart skipped a beat. It was Aiden. Why this matters. For LGBT people, the feeling of getting to know each other before we actually know each other is not uncommon, because we often spend a lot of time observing in silence. Especially in environments that are not completely safe, looks and small signs can become strong emotional material. Sometimes, a look from last year, a voice from next year, connects in a deeper way than any date. Mason froze, his fingers still on the mouse. A second photo appeared, this time Aiden helping a child put on a firefighter's helmet. He leaned down, smiling fondly, adjusting the strap. The last light of day slanted over his shoulders, creating a framed sunbeam. A strange feeling rose up inside Mason, something warm and slightly prickling. Like discovering a stranger who had passed through his life, but who he wasn't ready to see clearly at the time. It's crazy. I took a picture of that man, the way he smiled, the way he bowed slightly to the kids. I caught that moment, but I didn't realize it was important. Looking back now, I see the light in the photo, not the sunlight but him. From that rainy day until now, something in my heart has started to move. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not a coincidence anymore. Mason saved the photo in a separate folder. He renamed it, Before I Knew Your Name. And right then, in the middle of a quiet afternoon, as the rain was falling lightly outside the window, he knew. He wanted to see that man again. Not for any specific reason. Just because he felt like he had to. In love, especially same-sex love, there are pieces that come very quietly, a look, a smile, a stranger in an old photo. And then, on a normal day we look back, and no, they are not strangers. They are the people our hearts have silently remembered for a long time. The hero and the apple pie. Sometimes healing begins with fire, and a slice of warm pie. It was still cold that day. But this time, Mason wasn't wet from the rain, but from sweat and smoke. The fire on the street behind his apartment building wasn't big, but it was enough to send neighbors into a panic. Mason ran down to help evacuate the elderly and children, but he himself was slightly smoke-stained. His throat was dry, his clothes were covered in coal dust, and his heart was pounding in his chest. Mason didn't often see fire up close. And he didn't think he'd see Aiden, the firefighter who'd helped him with his stalled Jeep a few weeks earlier, that way. The second fateful moment. As Mason looked up from where he stood on the sidewalk, his face dirty, his hands still clutching the water bottle, he saw Aiden step out of the fire truck, an oxygen tank on his shoulder, his face glistening with sweat, but his eyes as bright and sure as the first time they met. Aiden saw Mason at almost the same time. And this time he didn't ask, "Are you okay?" in a strange voice. Instead, Aiden stepped back, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "Are you okay?" Mason just nodded, then coughed. Aiden handed him another bottle of water without saying anything else. But that look, warm as a comforting fire on a winter night, made Mason want to hold on to the moment longer. A thank you in the form of a cake. That night, Mason made apple pie. Not the super professional kind, but the homemade kind, clumsy but heartfelt. The recipe his mother had written by hand was now stuck to the fridge with a heart-shaped magnet. He placed it on the tray, writing a few words on a small note. To the neighborhood hero, thanks for remembering my name. Mason. Then he walked to the fire station, his hands shaking slightly, not because of the cold, but because, for the first time in years, he was walking toward someone. With purpose. Aiden wasn't on duty, but another soldier called him out as he handed over the tray of cookies. And when he saw Mason in his gray scarf holding a still warm apple pie, his eyes lit up. "Are you serious? I'm not just a photographer, you know." Mason chuckled, hiding his nervousness. "Would you like to come in? There's tea. And I can assure you, there's no fire." A first long conversation. The inside of the firehouse was surprisingly cozy, full of photos and family. They sat side by side on the couch near the kitchen, the smell of apple pie filling the room, and Aiden made peppermint tea, a kind Mason had never tried but found oddly comforting. "I thought you were the black coffee type," Aiden commented. "I used to. But after a year of losing sleep over deadlines, I learned to love tea," Mason said, then paused. "And learned to be quiet more." Aiden nodded, eyes looking away. "Me too. Saving people didn't teach me to talk much. It taught me to listen. Though sometimes, I don't know what I'm hearing from myself. In gay relationships, especially mature, traumatized ones, the ability to sit down and be honest, without joking or hiding, is rare and precious. Aiden is not the confident, alpha type like in the movies. He lost his ex-lover in a fire accident, and since then has become more withdrawn, devoting himself to work as a way to escape the pain. And Mason, after years of hiding in solitude, is now slowly finding his heart's voice again, and sitting across from the only person he doesn't feel the need to defend. Similar wounds. Have you ever been in love? Mason asked, light as air. No pressure. No demands. Aiden was silent for a moment. His eyes were on his teacup. Yes. A long time ago. He was a nurse. The first person who made me think I might be okay. That didn't end well? Aiden shook his head. It's not over. It's gone. Mason said nothing. He just silently held his teacup tighter. I lost someone too, he whispered. Not to death, but to fear. Someone who wasn't ready to be true to himself. And I wasn't strong enough to hold him back. As Mason stood up to leave, Aiden walked out to see him to the door. The night breeze blew gently and the smell of apple pie still lingered. Your cake. Is it okay? Aiden smiled. Sincere. A little sweet. Like the person who made it. Mason blushed. For the first time in years, he let his heart flutter without stopping. So, if I make apple pie again, would you like to have tea? Aiden nodded. Only with cinnamon. And you? In the world of adult gay men, sometimes what melts our hearts isn't a loud confession, but a slice of apple pie, baked with sincerity and shared loneliness. Aiden and Mason are not two perfect people. They are two hearts that have been burned by life. And now, they find each other, in a fire station, amid hot tea and broken memories. Smoldering memories. Some fires don't burn buildings. They burn inside us, for years. It didn't rain that night, but something in the air still made Mason feel cold. He stopped by the fire station because Aiden texted, cinnamon tea, and a quiet night. They sat on the porch, where the light from inside the station spilled out in a pale yellow. In front of them were 2 cups of tea, a small bag of biscuits, and the distance between them was gradually decreasing. Silence before an untold story. Aiden didn't start with a story. He looked far away, toward the shadows of the trees in the night. He turned his teacup gently, his eyes lingering on an invisible space that Mason couldn't see. Do you ever dream about what happened? Mason was silent. The question didn't require an answer. It was a warning that Aiden was about to tell something that wouldn't be easy, and Mason just needed to listen. The story of an ex-lover, a lost love. His name is Eric, Aiden began. His voice was low and even. No quaver, but there was something ashen about it, dull and real. We met when I was 26. He was an emergency nurse. Brown eyes, dark skin, a smile wider than the June sun. We loved each other quietly. Without fanfare. Just quick meals between shifts, touches of hands in the elevator that no one noticed. Small things that when they are gone, you realize how big they are. Mason didn't intervene. He just looked at Aiden, at the way this usually strong man was trying not to break. That day, I was called to a 3-story building fire. When I got there, someone reported that someone was trapped in the medical room on the 2nd floor. I didn't know it was Eric. Until I carried him down, and I realized. There was a moment of silence. The only sound they could hear was the wind rustling through the roof. He was breathing when I found him. But he didn't make it. The smoke had severely damaged his lungs. Aiden smiled slightly, but it was the kind of smile, when the heart doesn't know what else to do but smile. I was the last person to see him awake. He held my hand and said only one sentence, I'm not mad at you. I knew you would come. Mason lets himself soften for the first time. Mason said nothing. No words of comfort were enough. He simply placed his hand on the table near Aiden's, not touching, just enough to let the other know, I'm here. I've never heard anyone talk about an ex with such intact love, Mason whispered. It's not that I haven't forgotten, Aiden replied hoarsely. It's that I never wanted to forget. But I don't want to live there forever either. In that moment, Mason felt one thing more clearly than ever. This was no longer a conversation. This was a moment when 2 hearts, once broken, were slowly walking toward each other. No rush, no pressure, but real. A gentle ending, the healing begins. As Mason prepared to leave, Aiden held the door open for him. This time without asking too many questions, nor trying to pretend to be okay. Just two men standing in the dim light and one simple sentence. Thanks for listening to me without interrupting. Mason turned back. I straight. Thanks for trusting me enough to tell you. In the LGBT community, there is a pain that only those who have truly loved can understand. Not everyone has lost a loved one in a fire, but many of us have lost something, faith, hope, or ourselves. But the most beautiful thing is, even though old wounds remain, we can still learn to love again. Even though our hearts have burned out, they can still be lit up again, if the right person walks in. Unscheduled trip. Sometimes all it takes is one step too far, to realize who's willing to catch you. Aiden didn't have a plan. He just texted a quick note at 7 a.m. Nice day. There's a trail near Black Ridge. Wanna go? Mason was making coffee when he saw the message. He read it over and over again, feeling strange. Not because of the invitation, but because he expected it from the man more than he dared to admit. A journey that no one defines. 30 minutes later, they stood side by side on a trail into the woods, backpacks on their backs and water bottles in their hands. The sun was just rising behind the snow-capped mountains, creating a beautiful scene, not too bright, not too cold, just enough to make the two men feel safe as they groped their way closer. Mason slung his camera around his neck and Aiden, in a light jacket, walked slowly to his pace. I've never been hiking with anyone, Mason said softly, still looking at the pine needle-covered path. I have, but I never wanted anyone to go with me again. Until recently. Aiden replied, as light as the wind in the branches. In the middle of nature, the distance between two people also fades away. Mason usually lives in his own world, through the lens, through the still frames. But today the man next to him becomes the subject that he cannot help but notice. It wasn't that Aiden stood out. It was the way he walked, steady but unhurried. The way he pointed out to Mason each patch of moss, each safe path. The way he waited patiently for Mason to stop and take a picture of a log that was shining through. There was something about the way Aiden existed that made Mason feel protected. And for a gay man who had built walls around himself for so long, feeling protected was a rare luxury. The slip, and the touch that changed everything. Around noon, they reached a high cliff overlooking the valley below. Mason, absorbed in his angle, stepped too close to the edge. In a split second, his foot slipped off the loose rock, and his body swayed as he fell into the void. Mason. Aiden's voice rang out like thunder in the clear sky. A tug. Aiden's strong arm caught Mason's wrist just as he was about to fall. Everything faded, except for the grip. It wasn't just a saving, it was a holding. A holding on to a life, and a heart that was just beginning to believe. They fell to the ground, Mason on top of Aiden. They were both gasping for air. Eyes wide. Hands still clasped together. Mason looked at Aiden, his chest still heaving. Thanks. I almost. It's okay, Aiden whispered, still holding his hand. I can't let you fall. Silence after vibration. They sat side by side on the rock, drinking water, saying nothing for several minutes. Each was trying to understand what had just happened, and why their hands had not yet fully let go. Mason looked up. Aiden's eyes weren't as hard as they usually were. Something about them softened, as if he too was frightened, but not of the abyss. But because of the feeling of thinking that you might lose the other person. There are emotions that don't need words. There are touches, just for a moment, but they say more clearly than anything, that you have found someone whose heart you don't want to let go. For Aiden and Mason, it wasn't about climbing a mountain. It was about climbing over their own walls, and realizing they didn't need to keep it all to themselves anymore. When they returned, the sun was starting to set. Aiden drove Mason home. When he got out of the car, Mason turned around, leaned against the door and smiled. Next time, I won't back down. Aiden grinned. Good. Because I want to see you walking towards me. An unforgettable night. You don't plan the kiss that changes everything. It just happens when your heart's finally ready. When a storm changes plans, and people. The forecast called for light rain. But Oregon loves to play tricks in the fall. Aiden and Mason were taking sunset photos on the edge of the national forest when a huge storm suddenly rolled in. The wind howled. The sky turned leaden in 10 minutes. The rain lashed the forest like cold whiplashes. There's an old lifeguard cabin around here, Aiden shouted over the wind, tugging Mason's hand. It's not far. Mason nodded, running after him, clutching his camera tightly in his jacket. But the only thing he could think about was not the wind, nor the cold, it was Aiden's hand gripping his tightly. Cabin, small fire and a fragile distance. A log cabin perched halfway up the mountainside, once used by rangers as a makeshift shelter. The wooden door was rickety but functional. Inside were a few wooden chairs, a pile of dry wood and an old but functioning fireplace. Aiden lit the fire with expert skill. Meanwhile, Mason shook out his shirt, wiped his lens and looked around, for the first time in his life, wishing for a lasting storm. A fire crackled in the hearth. Warmth filled the small room. They sat close together on the couch, their hands wrapped around a mug of tea from the thermos Aiden always carried. Why small cabins have a strong impact. For those who have secretly loved and been hurt because of living in silence, a private space without judgmental eyes, without outside standards, is the only place where they can test their true feelings. And that cabin, in the storm, became a place where two men who had been lost, who had been closed off, could breathe deeply, and let go of the things they had not dared to say. Stories by the firelight, memories shared with tenderness. I hated thunder when I was little, Mason said softly, looking into the fire. Not because of the noise, but because it reminded me of being alone in the house. Mom and Dad weren't around. Aiden nodded slightly, the fire reflecting in his eyes. I used to hide under the table when there was a forest fire. Now I run into fires. Why did I choose that career? Because I know what it feels like to be helpless. And I don't want anyone to go through that if I can prevent it. Silent. Then Mason said softly, I think that's why I keep finding myself in nature photographs. Because they don't betray. They just exist. And if you're patient enough, they open up. Aiden looked at him. Deeply, as if seeing clearly for the first time. You too. The first touch, as light as a breath but makes the heart beat faster. In that moment the room seemed to shrink. The rain outside became the background music. And the first touch happened. Not lips, but Aiden's fingertips brushing Mason's as he handed him the cup of tea. Mason didn't pull back. He let his hand touch again, slowly as if testing his heart to see if it was really ready. And it's ready. A surprise kiss, no rush, just sincere. Aiden leaned closer. Slowly. Clearly. Without forcing it. Mason leaned toward him too. Their first kiss happened as a wordless consent. No rush. No demands. Just lips finding each other, after long months of no one daring to love anyone with their true hearts. It wasn't steamy like a movie, not romantic like a fairy tale. It was real, shaky and deep, as if both were saying, I'm here. And I'm not running away anymore. In the LGBT community, a first kiss is more than just a romantic moment. It's a statement. An act of courage. It says, I see you, I believe you, and I allow my heart to feel. In a small cabin in the middle of a storm, Mason and Aiden shared more than a kiss. They shared fear, faith, and the right many of us thought we didn't have, to be loved, truly and safely. I wonder if you feel the same way I do. Loving someone doesn't always mean you run to them. Sometimes, it means waiting, while they learn to stop running from themselves. One morning after the kiss, and the vague fear returns. Mason woke up the next morning in his apartment. The light from the window was dim, filtering through the curtains, and there was still a faint smell of smoke from yesterday's clothes. The storm had passed. But inside him, another storm was just beginning. Aiden didn't stay in the cabin. They parted with a brief hug. No promises. No we'll talk later. Just a slightly longer than usual look in each other's eyes, and a vague smile that didn't quite form. And it was that uncertainty that Mason feared the most. The familiar withdrawal, an obsessive defense mechanism for LGBT people who have been hurt. Mason had moments like that. With exes. With people who came and went. With every time he allowed himself to feel, he felt himself losing control. Adult LGBT people often carry invisible wounds. Rejection, unrequited love, or having loved someone who didn't have the courage to love openly. And from there, the fear of repetition becomes a defense mechanism. For Mason, last night's kiss was more than just a sweet moment. It was a big question that no one dared to answer. Is this real? Avoid, not because you don't care but because you care too much. For the next 3 days, Mason didn't respond to Aiden's messages. He read them, briefly, sincerely. The sky is bluer than usual today. Are you okay? I was thinking about the cabin and I thought, maybe we should talk. No pressure. I just wanted to know if you were okay. Mason typed, I think about you too, a few times and deleted it. He wanted to reply. But the fear of breaking something fragile between them kept him silent. When words are not enough. On the 4th day, Mason came home from work to find a small envelope stuck under his door. There was no name. Just strong, soft handwriting. For Mason. He opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, not long, not fancy. but each word seemed to be written from the heart. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I know exactly what I feel. I feel alive for the first time in a long time. I feel like I don't have to be strong for someone to lean on. I just need to be real so that someone can sit next to me when I'm tired. I can't promise I won't hurt you, but I can promise I won't leave you when you're scared. Because I was scared too. If you need time, I wait. If you want to forget, I respect that. But if you still feel something, even a small part of it, I'm here. My door is still open. And so is my heart. Aiden. Mason read it over and over again. And he cried. But not because he was sad. But for the first time in years, someone didn't push him into a hasty choice. Didn't force him to say yes or no. Just said gently, I'm here. When you're ready. And that, for those who have had to live in reserve, in secrecy, is the deepest way to love. In a world of quick responses, quick answers, and scenes followed by silence, a handwritten letter is a rare thing. Especially when it comes from a man who lost the love of his life. Aiden doesn't promise a future. He only talks about the present, where he chooses to stay, be patient, and love someone who is learning to trust again. And Mason is starting to understand that sometimes love doesn't come from a loud confession. It comes from someone daring to say, I was scared too. But this time I'm not running away. I chose to come back. Sometimes choosing someone doesn't mean chasing them. It means showing up, even when you're scared. The first rain of winter, cold on the skin, warm in the heart. The season in Edgeport was beginning to change. The trees along the streets were bare, and the first winter rain was not a torrential summer rain, but a steady, persistent drizzle, as if the sky was also nostalgic for something. Mason stood in front of the mirror, his dark hoodie faded from too many washes. His hands were shaking slightly, not because he was cold, but because he was about to do something he had never dared to do. Step into the place that could change everything. He took Aiden's note, now slightly crumpled from repeated reading, and put it in his pocket. Not to return it, but to remind himself, someone was waiting. Not to ask for anything, but just waiting, if he chose to come back. The road is short but longer than any journey. The fire station was only a 15-minute walk from Mason's house. He didn't call. He didn't text. He knew, there were some things that weren't meant to be said on screen. Some words were meant to be said with eyes, with a trembling voice, with rain soaking your shoulders. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was enough to soak Mason's hair and shoulders as he walked to the firehouse porch. The yellow lights inside cast a warm glow, a stark contrast to the cold wind outside. He looked out the window. Aiden was sitting in his chair, his back to the door, looking down at something in his hand, maybe a notebook or the ring he always wore. And then Mason knocked. Once. Twice. Slow but clear. Short words but melt the heart. Aiden opened the door. He was surprised. He said nothing. His eyes swept over Mason's face, stopping at the slightly trembling lips, at the wet but determined eyes. Mason took a deep breath. Then he said in a low but steady voice, I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. That's all. A hug promises nothing, but heals everything. No quick kiss. No immediate, I love you too. Just a hug. Long, tight, shaky, rain damp, but so warm that the world melted away. Aiden held Mason like he had been waiting for this moment for years, not just weeks. He said nothing. He just buried his face in Mason's neck, and let out a sigh that felt like a weight had been lifted. I'm still scared, Mason whispered, his voice choked. But I think, if I keep being scared, I'll lose the thing that can save me. Aiden replied simply, and I'm here. Not letting you go again. Love sometimes doesn't start with, I love you, but with, I don't want to keep you waiting anymore. Because in LGBT love, where we have to wait our whole lives to live our true lives, when someone comes back, it's a miracle. The first rain of winter does not wash away fear, but it softens it. And in that cold, two men, who have lost, who have waited, have chosen to hold hands, not because everything is perfect, but because they are willing to heal together. The fire that never goes out. Love isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested when the fire gets too close, and you choose to stay anyway. New life, not rosy but real. 3 months after that hug in the rain, Mason and Aiden moved in together. Not a moving in because we love each other decision, but a decision born of certainty. That while each of them still carried scars, they were ready to build something new, together. The small apartment near the beach, with windows overlooking the pine forest, gradually became home. They shared the housework, had their own schedules, but always kept a no-screen Sunday. A Sunday without electronic devices, just books, music, or 2 hot cups of tea together on the balcony. Their feelings didn't change, but the way they loved each other grew deeper, more peaceful. No longer did they need to touch each other all the time. Just look at each other over breakfast and smile. Then one day the phone rang at 2 a.m. Mason woke up. The screen displayed the name, Edgeport Fire Station. His heart felt like it was being squeezed. Aiden injured in a rescue at a building whose roof collapsed due to a fire. No one died, but a section of the ceiling fell as Aiden was helping the last person out. He suffered a shoulder injury that required surgery and a full cast on his right arm. It wasn't life-threatening, but it could permanently affect his mobility, meaning his job as a firefighter would never be the same again. Mason sat in the hospital. Cold air blew through the windows, the lights were blindingly white. He held Aiden's hand, his good left, and remembered the feeling of that hand on the edge of the cliff for the first time. At this moment he did not shed tears. He just stared at Aiden's slow breathing, and realized this was the true test of love. Life changes, and silence begins to form. After returning home, Aiden became quieter. He tried to act like he was fine, but Mason could tell that the strong man who once saved people was now fighting his own fear of losing his self-worth. He spoke little. He smiled little. He refused to see his colleagues. Mason once heard him whisper in the kitchen, "If I can't get back on the team, who am I?" Mason was tired too. But he didn't back down. He is not the type of person who is good at making things happy again. But he is the one who knows how to be there quietly, when someone needs space to collapse. Once when Aiden cried in the night, silently, shaking, Mason didn't ask. He just put his arms around him gently and whispered, "You don't have to be anyone. You just have to be the one I love." Real fire, not in a fireplace or building. One afternoon, Aiden sat on the porch, the sunset reflecting on his face, his hair long from weeks of convalescence, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. Mason brought 2 cups of tea, one hand still bandaged. "Remember when I almost fell off the cliff?" Mason asked softly. "I never forgot. And you pulled me back." "Yeah. Now it's my turn." Mason took his hand. No one said anything more. But in Aiden's eyes, the fire that he thought had gone out began to burn again. The fire in a relationship is not in the first touches, not in the warm cabin in the middle of a storm, not in the unexpected kisses. It is in the moment when someone can't stand on their own, but there is still someone by their side who won't leave. For Aiden and Mason, love doesn't die because of pain. The flame doesn't die because of trial. It lives because they choose to love with patience, with a hand that holds, even if only one hand is left. Love is what brings us back. We don't always return to where we started, but we do come back to the people who made us feel like home. Recovery time, slow, long, but not alone. It took Aiden nearly 3 months to recover from his injury. The surgery on his right shoulder was successful, but the physical therapy required a patience he was not used to. He used to run into fire. Now, just raising his arms above his head hurts so much that he sweats. And that makes Aiden wrestle with fear. I'm not myself anymore. Mason, the one who stays, no miracle needed. Mason doesn't try to cheer up Aiden. He doesn't say, "You'll be fine." Instead he says, "You don't have to do anything to deserve this love. You just have to allow yourself to be loved." Every morning Mason makes tea. Every afternoon he sits next to Aiden while he practices. And every night he doesn't ask, "How are you feeling today?" He just lies down next to him, letting Aiden know he doesn't have to be strong all day. An idea sprouted from pain, and watered with love. One morning as they sat at the dinner table, Aiden whispered, I wanted to help other people like me. Like you. People who have been lost, who have been afraid, and don't know where to start." Mason looked at him, then nodded. "So we start with ourselves." The birth of Ember House Center. The two spent nearly the next year together designing, applying for permits, fundraising, and building a small space called Ember House. The Small Fire Still Burns. A non-profit center for LGBTQ+ people who have experienced loss, emotional, family, work. Former frontline workers like firefighters, nurses, EMTs, recovering from trauma. Young people are learning to be true to themselves. At Ember House they host silent circles, where no one has to talk, just sit next to each other. There are writing, drawing, rock climbing, photography classes, and even Sunday afternoon tea-making sessions, which Mason jokingly calls caffeine therapy plus emotional healing. The final scene, quiet but full of hope. Late one afternoon, the sunlight bathed the large wooden room at the back of Ember House in golden light. Aiden was guiding a young man through arm lifts for physical therapy. Mason was cleaning his camera, preparing for a weekend photography class. They exchanged a brief glance. No words needed. Because they knew, this place, this journey, was what brought them both back. Not just from the pain, but from the parts of themselves they thought were beyond saving. Not everyone in the LGBT community is lucky enough to have a beautiful love story. But everyone deserves to be loved, in a way that makes them feel safe, complete, and see themselves in the eyes of the other person. Mason and Aiden didn't find each other amid perfection. They found each other amid fire, rain, loss, and days when they weren't sure they had anything to give. But it was love, slow, steady, unconditional, that kept them coming back. To each other. To themselves. And to everyone else who needed a little fire to keep them from collapsing in the dark. If the story touches you, leave a like to let me know you're still here. Don't forget to click subscribe to not miss the emotional slices of true, healing, and worthy LGBT love. And if you've ever experienced something similar, share it in the comments. Maybe somewhere, someone else is finding themselves in your story. Thank you for staying until the end. We will meet again, in the next Pieces of Love.